I was paid $500 to secretly photograph a stranger's proposal, only for her to spot my lens and mouth help me across the patio. When I showed the photos to her friends, they said they'd been trying to reach her for weeks. When I finally confronted him in court, he smirked and said, "She'll crawl back. They always do." I just stared at him. That was 18 months ago. Last week, she walked into the same restaurant in the red dress she bought for herself, surrounded by friends who laughed without fear. When did an odd job go horribly wrong? I was editing wedding photos at a coffee shop when this guy Isaac approached me and asked if I wanted to make $500 for 30 minutes of work. He could tell I was a photographer, and he needed someone to hide in the bushes outside Chez Laurent to secretly photograph his proposal that night. He said his girlfriend Eden would absolutely die if she knew a photographer was there because she hated being the center of attention, but he wanted perfect photos of the moment she said yes. Isaac showed me texts from Eden full of heart emojis and inside jokes, proof she was obsessed with him, while explaining exactly how this would work. He'd reserved the patio table at 8. I'd hide in the landscaping at 7:30, and when he dropped his napkin, that was my signal that the proposal was coming. My landlord was threatening eviction, and $500 would buy me another month, so I agreed even though something felt weird about photographing people without their consent. Isaac sent me 15 texts that afternoon, with increasingly specific instructions about angles, insisting I needed to shoot from the left, because Eden had a tendency to look upset when she's actually just processing happiness, and making me promise to delete any photos where she wasn't smiling. He kept saying she was shy and might seem uncomfortable, but that meant she was excited. The vibes were honestly not it, but $500 was $500. I got to the restaurant early and found the perfect spot behind some decorative hedges with a clear view of their table. The telephoto lens I'd brought could practically count their eyelashes from where I was crouched. Isaac had said Eden would be wearing the red dress he bought her, the one that meant she knew tonight was special. Eden arrived at 7:45 wearing jeans and a sweater, not the red dress, and she kept checking her phone while standing outside like she was deciding whether to go in. Through my lens, I could see her hands shaking as she typed something, then deleted it, then typed again. When Isaac waved from the table, she walked over like she was heading to her own execution. He stood up to kiss her, but she turned so it hit her cheek instead of her lips, and I captured the flash of irritation that crossed his face before he covered it with a smile. The wine came first, and Isaac poured Eden a glass, even though she put her hand over it trying to say no. He moved her hand and filled it anyway, then made a toast to their future that she barely pretended to sip. Through my lens, I watched her check the exits, count the other diners, and measure the distance to the street. Every photo I took showed a woman looking for escape routes, while her boyfriend performed romance for an audience of one hidden photographer. Isaac kept touching her hand, her face, her hair, and each time she subtly pulled away, he'd reach again more insistently. By 8:10, the proposal was definitely running late because Isaac kept trying to create the perfect moment while Eden pushed food around her plate without eating. He'd ordered for both of them without asking her, explaining to the waiter that he knew what his girlfriend wanted better than she did, and Eden just sat there moving asparagus from one side to the other. The conversation looked one-sided through my lens with Isaac talking and gesturing, while Eden nodded at the wrong moments like she wasn't even listening. At one point, she started to say something, but Isaac cut her off to tell another story about their supposed perfect relationship. The couple at the next table was having their own romantic dinner, and every time they laughed, Isaac would glance over with this competitive look, like he needed to prove his relationship was better. He'd lean across to kiss Eden's hand and hold the pose until I'd gotten the shot, even though she tried to pull away after a second. Through the telephoto, I could see her nails digging into her palm under the table, leaving little half-moon marks in her skin. Isaac reached under the table where I knew the ring box was hidden, then pulled his hand back when Eden said something that made his jaw clench. At 8:20, Eden tried to check her phone again, and Isaac grabbed it, playfully wrestling it away while saying something about no distractions tonight. She laughed, but it was the kind of laugh that looked like crying through my lens, all teeth and no eyes. He put her phone in his pocket, and she watched it disappear like a lifeline being cut. The waiter came to clear their barely touched plates, and Isaac ordered dessert, even though Eden shook her head, insisting they needed to celebrate even though nothing had happened yet. That's when Isaac stood up suddenly with the ring box, his chair scraping against the patio stones loud enough that everyone turned to watch. He started his speech about destiny while dropping to one knee, and through my lens I watched the last bit of color drain from Eden's face. Her eyes swept across the patio desperately as other diners started filming with their phones, and then her gaze found the gap in the hedges where I was hidden. She could see me, see my camera pointed at her, and her mouth opened silently. She mouthed 2 words directly into my lens. "Help me." My finger froze on the shutter button as Eden suddenly stood up, her chair scraping backward while her hand knocked the wine glass sideways across the white tablecloth. The red wine spread like blood while Isaac stayed frozen on one knee, still holding the ring box open as phones appeared in every hand around the patio. Eden backed away step by step, her head shaking as she said, "I can't do this," loud enough that I caught it through my telephoto lens. Isaac's face changed from confusion to something darker as he pushed himself up, the ring box still clutched in his fist, while other diners filmed the whole mess. He lunged forward and grabbed Eden's wrist before she could get past the next table, pulling her close enough that I could see his lips moving as he hissed something at her. Through my lens, I watched his fingers dig into her arm hard enough to leave marks, while people at nearby tables shifted uncomfortably in their seats. A guy at the table closest to them stood up and walked over, asking if everything was all right, and Isaac immediately let go of Eden's wrist to turn on the charm. Eden used that second to pull free and run toward the street, her purse forgotten on her chair as she pushed through the patio gate. Isaac stood there holding the ring box, telling everyone who would listen that she gets anxiety attacks, and this happens sometimes, nothing to worry about. I tracked Eden with my lens as she made it 2 blocks before collapsing against a parking meter, her whole body shaking as she sobbed into her hands. The other diners went back to their meals looking relieved while Isaac pocketed the ring and started walking after Eden with this determined look on his face. He passed right by my hiding spot, and I held my breath, watching through the telephoto as he caught up to Eden at the corner. She flinched when he touched her shoulder, then he grabbed her upper arm and steered her into the doorway of a closed shop where they couldn't be seen from the restaurant. Through my lens, I watched him gesture aggressively while she pressed herself against the building, nodding at whatever he was saying. After maybe 3 minutes, he led her back toward the restaurant, his hand locked around her upper arm as they walked. Back at their table, Isaac went into full damage control mode, loudly explaining to anyone within earshot that Eden has social anxiety and gets overwhelmed by attention. She sat there silent and still while he forced her hand into his, her whole body rigid as he stroked her fingers and smiled at the other diners. The waiter brought them new wine glasses, and Isaac made a show of pouring for both of them, raising his glass in a toast while Eden stared at the table. For the next 30 minutes, they sat there pretending to have a normal dinner while I documented every forced smile and every time Eden tried to pull her hand away. When they finally left, Isaac's arm was locked around Eden's shoulders like a vice as he guided her to his car in the parking lot. Eden glanced back toward the hedges one last time, and I captured her hollow expression before Isaac opened the passenger door and basically pushed her inside. Back at my apartment, I uploaded all the photos and started sorting them into folders on my laptop. The first folder I named Proposal Isaac and filled it with the staged romantic shots where you couldn't see Eden's terror if you didn't look too close. The second folder I named named evidence and filled it with every image showing her real distress, the finger marks on her wrist, her mouthing those 2 words directly at my camera. The $500 in my pocket felt wrong as I stared at Isaac's payment email, knowing that sending him the romantic photos would basically be helping him trap her. The next morning, I couldn't stop thinking about Eden's face, so I searched her name on social media until I found her barely used Instagram. All the photos showed a happy couple, but they looked nothing like what I'd seen at the restaurant, and the most recent post was 3 weeks old. Someone named Jordan Park had commented on multiple photos asking, "Haven't seen you in forever, you okay?" But Eden never responded to any of them. I clicked on Jordan's profile and saw they worked at the same marketing firm as Eden, so I sent a message saying I didn't know them, but I'd photographed Eden last night and was concerned about her safety. Jordan responded within 2 minutes with, "Oh my god, is she okay? I'm her roommate but haven't seen her in 2 weeks because Isaac says she's staying with him." Jordan typed for what felt like forever, those 3 dots appearing and disappearing while I sat there staring at my phone. Oh wow, I'm really curious about how the photographer picked up on all those tiny details through the camera lens, like Eden's nails digging into her palm and the way she counted exits. When the message finally came through, it was a wall of text about how Isaac had convinced Eden to move in with him 3 months ago after telling her that Jordan was toxic and holding her back. Jordan explained that she and Eden's sister Lily had been trying to reach Eden, but Isaac always answered her phone saying she was busy or sleeping or in the shower. I scrolled through the photos on my camera and selected 3 that showed Eden's face clearly, her eyes looking everywhere but at Isaac, her hands gripping the edge of the table. I uploaded them to a file sharing site and sent Jordan the link with a note that these were from last night's proposal. Within seconds, my phone rang and Jordan's face appeared on video call, her eyes red and puffy as she clicked through the images on her laptop. She gasped at one particular shot where Eden's face was turned away from Isaac mid-kiss attempt. Jordan said this was exactly what she'd been afraid of and that we needed to get Eden help, but Isaac was a lawyer at Preston and Associates who knew how to manipulate the system. She kept clicking through the photos while telling me about other red flags like how Isaac had gotten Eden to quit her book club and stop going to yoga because he said those activities took time away from their relationship. That afternoon, I went back to the coffee shop where Isaac had first approached me, needing caffeine and time to process everything. The barista recognized me and mentioned that Isaac came in weekly, always sitting by the window watching people work on their laptops. She said he'd approached several freelancers over the past few months with quick jobs, though she didn't know what kind. I ordered my usual and sat in the corner Googling Isaac's law firm, finding his professional headshot where he looked confident and trustworthy in an expensive suit. My phone buzzed with another text from Jordan saying Eden's sister Lily had just told her that Eden had bruises on her arms last month. When Lily asked about them, Eden said she was clumsy but looked scared, and Isaac had been standing right behind her the whole conversation. Jordan sent me Lily's number and said she wanted to talk to me too since I'd seen Eden most recently. I spent the next hour researching domestic violence resources on my laptop, reading about coercive control patterns that matched everything I'd witnessed and heard about Isaac. Every website emphasized the danger of confronting abusers directly and stressed the importance of letting survivors lead their own escape when they felt ready. The statistics were terrifying, especially the parts about how leaving was the most dangerous time and how abusers often escalated when they felt their control slipping. I bookmarked several hotline numbers and local resources, wondering if there was a way to get this information to Eden without Isaac knowing. 3 days passed with me checking my email constantly, jumping every time my phone buzzed, unable to focus on my actual work. Then Isaac's email arrived with the subject line, "Amazing photos," and my stomach dropped. He wrote that the photos were perfect, and Eden loved them, that she was showing everyone and couldn't stop talking about how beautiful they were. He said payment was sent plus a bonus for my discretion and professionalism, and mentioned he had another job next month if I was interested. I checked my bank account and saw $750 pending, money I desperately needed but that now felt dirty. My phone rang immediately, and it was Jordan panicking because Eden had just posted on Facebook that they were engaged and moving to Seattle next week for Isaac's new job opportunity. Jordan read me the post, and it didn't sound like Eden at all, too formal and cheerful, like someone else had written it. She said Eden would never leave without saying goodbye to Lily. They were too close for that. We agreed to meet at a diner near Jordan's apartment where she could show me more evidence of what had been happening. Jordan was already there when I arrived, laptop open and tissues scattered across the table, scrolling through old text conversations with Eden. She showed me how Eden's texting style had changed over the past few months, going from sending funny memes every day to these stiff formal messages about needing space from negative influences. Jordan's voice cracked as she explained that the phrase negative influences was something Isaac always said about Eden's friends and family. She pulled up more recent texts that sounded scripted, like Eden was reading from something Isaac had written for her. Lily arrived looking exhausted, sliding into the booth and immediately asking if we'd heard from Eden today. She explained she'd driven by Eden and Isaac's apartment 5 times that week, but Eden's car was never there even though Isaac's was. Lily thought Isaac was hiding Eden's car in the garage, so people would think she was out when she was really trapped inside. She'd even gone up and knocked once, but Isaac answered saying Eden was at the gym, though Eden had canceled her gym membership months ago according to Jordan. I pulled out my camera and showed them both my full photo set from that night, including the ones I hadn't sent Jordan yet. When we got to the photo where Eden was mouthing "help me" directly into my lens, Lily broke down completely. She kept saying we had to do something before Isaac took Eden to Seattle, because once she was isolated there with no support system, they might never see her again. That night I couldn't sleep, so I started digging into Isaac's social media history at 3 in the morning. His Facebook went back 8 years, and I scrolled through every single post looking for patterns. Around 4:30 I found something that made my stomach drop. 2 years ago there was an engagement announcement with a woman named Claire who had this huge smile in every photo, but after the engagement post, Claire just disappeared from his timeline completely. I searched her name and found her profile, which hadn't been updated since a post about needing space to heal with all the comments turned off. Jordan called me the next morning saying she'd been up all night too, and had found Claire's old roommate through LinkedIn. The roommate had responded to Jordan's message within an hour with a warning that made us both go cold. She said Claire didn't want to talk about Isaac, but wanted anyone who asked to know he was dangerous and that she'd moved back to Michigan and changed her name. We were trying to figure out what to do next when my phone rang with a number I didn't recognize. It was Tom from Chez Laurent saying I'd left my lens cap at the restaurant, which I knew wasn't true because I always check my gear. Then he dropped the real reason he was calling. Eden had come back to the restaurant yesterday with bruises on her neck, asking if they had security footage from the proposal night. Isaac had shown up and dragged her out before she could explain why she needed it. Tom asked if I could meet him at the restaurant because he'd pulled the footage and thought I should see it. When I got there, he took me to the back office where he had the security system pulled up on his computer. The footage showed Eden coming in alone around 2 in the afternoon, looking over her shoulder every few seconds. She was talking urgently to the hostess and kept pointing toward the patio where the proposal had happened. Then Isaac appeared in the frame, moving fast, and grabbed her arm hard enough that she stumbled. Tom said Eden had been asking about me specifically because she'd seen me taking photos and wanted to know if the restaurant knew who I was. The next day, Jordan and Lily and I sat in my apartment trying to figure out our next move. Calling the police seemed useless since Isaac would just manipulate the situation and make Eden deny everything. We decided decided our only shot was to try reaching Eden directly when Isaac was at work. Lily would watch his office building to make sure he stayed there while Jordan and I went to the apartment. We waited outside Isaac's building for 20 minutes, working up the nerve to knock. When Eden finally opened the door, my heart sank. She had a black eye that was badly covered with makeup, and she immediately tried to close the door, saying Isaac wasn't home in this flat, rehearsed voice. Jordan pushed past her into the apartment before she could shut us out. The place was a disaster, with Eden's phone smashed to pieces on the kitchen counter and her laptop completely destroyed on the floor. Eden started crying and admitted Isaac had destroyed them after finding out she'd tried to email her sister. He'd accused her of conspiring against their relationship and said she couldn't be trusted with technology anymore. She kept looking around nervously and finally pointed to the smoke detectors. There were tiny cameras built into them that she said were connected to Isaac's phone so he could watch the apartment from anywhere. She was whispering that he was probably watching right now and begging us to leave before he came back. Her hands were shaking so bad she could barely hold the glass of water Jordan had gotten her. I pulled out my phone and showed Eden the photos from the proposal night. When she saw the one where she was mouthing "help me" directly into my lens, her face just crumbled. She said she knew someone was there that night and had been praying I'd see what was really happening. Isaac had made her practice saying yes for weeks before the proposal. He told her if she embarrassed him in public, he would hurt himself and it would be her fault. That's when Lily started texting frantically that Isaac had just left his office and was driving fast toward the apartment. Eden went completely white and started shoving us toward the door. She said he had a gun in the bedroom safe, and the last time someone tried to help her, he'd held it to her head until she called them crazy in front of the police. The way Eden practiced saying yes for weeks before the proposal makes me wonder how many other things Isaac made her rehearse. Did he script their whole relationship like a play, where she had to memorize her lines perfectly? We ran down the back stairs while Jordan watched the street from her car and texted updates about Isaac getting closer. Eden grabbed a baseball cap from the laundry room and pulled it low over her face as we pushed through the emergency exit into the alley behind the building. Tom's van was waiting with the engine running, and we jumped in just as Jordan texted that Isaac's BMW was turning into the parking garage. We drove 2 blocks away and parked where we could see the building entrance, watching Isaac storm through the lobby doors carrying flowers and what looked like jewelry bags. 5 minutes later, Eden's phone started buzzing with texts from him, and she showed me the Facebook post he'd made her write before we left. So, blessed to have a fiancé who rushes home just to check on me. Can't wait for Seattle. The next morning, I called Detective Maria Vasquez, a domestic violence specialist whose card Tom had given me, and sent her all the photos from the restaurant plus the ones I'd taken of Eden's black eye. She looked at everything during our video call and sighed, explaining that without Eden filing a report herself, there wasn't much police could do since these situations needed careful planning to keep victims safe. Over the next few days, our group spent hours researching extraction strategies online, and Lily found statistics showing violence increased by 75% when victims tried to leave their abusers. We realized any rescue attempt could push Isaac to kill Eden, especially since he had that gun and knew where her family lived. That's when Tom's phone rang with a call from Rachel Brennan, who said she was Isaac's sister and had gotten our numbers from Tom's business partner. She wanted to meet about the engagement photos she'd heard we took, saying she was worried about Eden because Isaac had done this before, and their family kept enabling him since he threatened suicide whenever anyone confronted him about his behavior. Rachel met us at a diner the next day and told us Isaac got expelled from law school for stalking a professor, but their dad pulled strings to get him into another program. She said he'd always been controlling, but it was getting worse, and their mom died still thinking he was just protective of the women he dated. Rachel couldn't let another woman get hurt, especially after what happened to his ex-girlfriend Claire, who disappeared 2 years ago after trying to leave him. 3 days later, Detective Vasquez called to tell me Eden had come to the station at 3 in the morning with a split lip, but Isaac showed up an hour later with someone he called their counselor, who convinced Eden she was having a mental health crisis. Eden left with them voluntarily, and without her cooperation, the detective's hands were tied, even though she suspected the counselor was fake. The next morning, Jordan pulled security footage from Eden's apartment building through a friend who worked there, and it showed Isaac carrying an unconscious Eden to his car at 4 in the morning. I recognized the supposed counselor as Isaac's friend from his social media, a guy who sold supplements online and definitely had no counseling credentials, but probably had a business card Isaac printed. Jordan also found that Eden had managed to send one email from the library computer before Isaac found her, saying he was moving them tomorrow instead of next week, and begging us not to forget about her. The email said if something happened to her, we should check the restaurant dumpster because she'd hidden something there Thursday night. I drove to Chez Laurent before dawn and searched through the dumpster until I found Eden's old phone wrapped in plastic bags and duct tape. The phone was locked, but Lily remembered Eden mentioning her childhood dog's birthday during one of our conversations, and that turned out to be the passcode. The phone had dozens of voice recordings Eden had made over the past 6 months, capturing Isaac screaming at her, threatening to hurt her family if she left, and describing his detailed plans to isolate her from everyone. One recording from 2 weeks ago had Isaac admitting he'd handled Claire the same way when she tried to leave, and another had him saying no one would believe Eden over a lawyer, and he'd have her committed to a mental hospital before she could ever testify against him. Maria called the next morning saying she needed to meet with the prosecutor right away about the recordings. I drove to the courthouse and sat outside the meeting room while they reviewed everything for 2 hours. The prosecutor kept shaking his head and saying the recordings were strong, but Oregon law needed both people to agree to being recorded. Without Eden saying she made them, they couldn't use any of it in court. Maria pushed back hard, but the prosecutor said his hands were tied by the law. Rachel texted me during the meeting saying she had important news about her family. We met at a park where she told me her dad would definitely protect Isaac since they went to law school together. But her mom's sister Catherine was a judge in Seattle who never liked Isaac. Catherine had been watching him for years and thought something was off about how he treated women. If Eden could get to Seattle, Catherine might be the only person with enough power to help. Rachel gave me Catherine's private number and said to only call if Eden made it there safely. The next morning, I watched Isaac's apartment building from across the street when a huge moving truck pulled up. Through my binoculars, I could see Eden carrying boxes while Isaac stayed right next to her the whole time. She moved like a robot, picking things up and putting them down without any expression on her face. Isaac kept his hand on her back, steering her where he wanted her to go. Every few minutes, Eden would look toward the street like she was hoping someone would show up. Jordan must have been watching too because she suddenly appeared and started walking toward the truck. Isaac saw her coming and stepped in front of Eden, yelling loud enough that everyone on the street turned to look. He called Jordan a crazy stalker who'd been harassing them for weeks and told her to leave them alone. Building security came running when Isaac waved them over, and Jordan had to back away while Eden just stood there frozen. Isaac put his arm around Eden and walked her back inside while security made Jordan leave the area. I followed the moving truck when it left an hour later, staying 3 cars behind on the highway. Lily texted that she was taking a train to Seattle to warn Catherine in person since phone calls might not be safe. Rachel sent Isaac's new Seattle address and the name of his law firm, warning that he'd already told people there about his unstable fiancé who needed constant supervision. The truck stopped at a rest area after 4 hours of driving, and I pulled in behind some other cars. Isaac went to pump gas while Eden walked to the bathroom alone for the first time time all day. I rushed over and caught her at the door, but she shook her head hard and whispered that he put trackers in her purse and shoes. If she stopped too long, he'd know something was wrong and come looking for her. She mouthed the word Seattle and held up 3 fingers, then ran back to the truck before Isaac finished with the gas. 3 days until something would happen in Seattle is what I figured she meant. I called Lily, who said Catherine was working on something, but needed time to make sure it was legally solid. Catherine had to be careful because one wrong move, and Isaac would take Eden somewhere no one could find her. We got to Seattle late that night, and Isaac's new building had cameras everywhere, plus a doorman who checked IDs. I found a coffee shop across the street and watched Isaac walk Eden inside with his hand gripping her elbow tight. Eden looked back once and our eyes met through the window for just a second before Isaac pulled her into the elevator. Lily met with Catherine the next day and found out the judge had been keeping files on Isaac since their mother's funeral. Catherine saw Isaac corner Eden at the funeral and threatened to hurt her if she ever tried to leave him. The judge had been working with Seattle's domestic violence unit to build a case, but they needed Eden to ask for help herself. Catherine said they had one chance to do this right, or Isaac would disappear with Eden forever. I spent the next morning outside Isaac's law firm watching him arrive alone at 8 sharp. His co-workers mentioned his fiancée was too sick to come to the office party next week. One paralegal pulled another aside and whispered that Eden looked terrified when Isaac brought her in to sign some papers yesterday. That afternoon, Jordan arrived at my apartment with Rachel, Isaac's sister, who looked like she hadn't slept in days. Rachel carried a thick folder of medical records from someone named Claire's roommate, showing hospital visits and injuries from when Claire dated Isaac 2 years ago. Claire herself was too scared to come forward, but her roommate documented everything with photos and dates. I spread all my evidence across the dining table while Rachel went through each piece, her hands shaking as she recognized Isaac's patterns. The restaurant photos, the recordings from the coffee shop, witness statements from the waiter and other diners. Everything painted the same picture of a man who wouldn't take no for an answer. Making copies took hours as we organized everything into 3 separate sets, one for the police, one for my lawyer aunt, and one hidden in my neighbor's apartment just in case. My aunt called that evening saying she'd arranged a meeting with Detective Patricia Smith, who specialized in domestic violence cases at Seattle PD. The next morning, Detective Smith reviewed everything in a conference room at the station, flipping through photos while taking notes. She looked up after an hour and said this was one of the most documented cases she'd seen, but timing would be critical for Eden's safety. I'm trying to figure out how Eden managed to hide that phone in the dumpster while Isaac was watching her so closely. She must have planned that Thursday night escape really carefully. That night, Isaac posted on Facebook about their intimate wedding ceremony happening in 2 days at his apartment with no guests because Eden wanted privacy. Jordan immediately recognized this as isolation tactics, since once married, Isaac would have medical decision-making power if Eden had an accident. Detective Williams got building management to let her access security footage while Isaac was at work the next day. The footage showed Eden hadn't left the apartment in 3 days, and Isaac had been bringing in bags of groceries and what looked like medical supplies. At 2 in the morning, I couldn't sleep, so I went to stake out Isaac's building with my telephoto lens from across the street. Through the lens, I saw movement on their balcony and focused to find Eden standing there in pajamas while Isaac slept inside. She held a piece of paper against the glass door, and I zoomed in to read the shaky handwriting that said, "Tomorrow he leaves at 8 help." She held it for exactly 30 seconds before disappearing back inside, and I immediately texted the photo to Detective Brown. Brown mobilized her team for an 8:15 extraction the next morning, while my aunt prepared emergency custody papers. Rachel agreed to call Isaac at 8:10, claiming their dad had a heart attack to distract him or make him leave work. Extraction day arrived, and I sat in the coffee shop across from Isaac's building at 7:45, my hands shaking so bad I could barely hold my camera. Jordan and another advocate named Lily waited in Detective Davis's unmarked car down the block. Rachel sat in her car 3 blocks away, rehearsing what she'd say when she called Isaac. Every second felt like an hour as we watched the building entrance and waited for Isaac to leave for work. At 8:02, Isaac walked out, checking his phone obsessively and looking back at the building twice before heading toward his car. Rachel made the call at 8:10, and through the coffee shop window I could see Isaac answer, his face changing as she delivered the fake news about their father. He stopped walking and stood on the sidewalk, looking back at his building, then at his car like he was torn between going back to Eden or driving to the hospital. Detective Miller's team was already entering the building through the service entrance, while Isaac paced on the sidewalk still on the phone with Rachel. Then Isaac suddenly ended the call and started walking back toward the building entrance at a fast pace. I frantically texted the team, "Abort, he's coming back," but Miller's team was already at Eden's door on the 7th floor. Through my earpiece, I heard Miller make the call to continue since they were already committed, and backing out now would alert Isaac. Miller's voice came through my earpiece saying they were knocking on Eden's door while I watched Isaac sprint across the lobby toward the elevators. The security guard barely looked up from his phone as Isaac jabbed the button over and over, and through my earpiece I heard Eden's voice crack when she opened her door and saw the police badges. She said something about him always knowing, and Miller's team moved fast, getting her out of the apartment just as the elevator doors opened on the 7th floor, and Isaac stepped out holding his phone up to record. He started yelling about kidnapping and false arrest, while Eden went completely still between 2 officers, her whole body shutting down like she wasn't even there anymore. The team got her down the service stairs while Isaac ran after them calling his law firm and screaming about lawsuits, and I followed in my car as they headed to the police station with Isaac right behind them in his BMW. At the station, Eden sat in the interview room staring at nothing while Jordan held her hand, and she kept saying the same words over and over about how he would find her, because he always found her. Patricia finally got Eden to focus by asking about the bruises visible on her wrists, and that's when Eden started rolling up her sleeves to show the burn marks on her arms. She pulled up her shirt to reveal cuts across her ribs and back, old ones and new ones in different stages of healing, while I handed Patricia the USB drive with all my photos and recordings. Eden told them about the suicide practice sessions, where Isaac made her hold pills in her mouth or tie ropes around her neck, saying if she ever betrayed him, she'd have to do it for real. 2 weeks later, my aunt got the emergency protection order pushed through while Isaac's law firm put him on leave, but he was already posting videos online claiming Eden had been brainwashed by jealous friends who wanted to destroy their perfect relationship. Eden stayed at a domestic violence shelter where every door slam made her jump and every footstep in the hall sent her into panic mode. When I visited her there, she grabbed my hands and told me I'd saved her life, that seeing me in those bushes that night was the first time she thought maybe someone could see what was really happening. She said the photos gave her hope that proof existed somewhere Isaac couldn't control or delete. 3 weeks in, Eden started trauma therapy while the prosecutor built the case, and Isaac violated the protection order 6 times by showing up at the shelter, her parents' house, and even the courthouse. Each violation got documented with security footage and witness statements, and his own father finally admitted to my aunt that he'd seen this pattern before with Isaac's previous girlfriends. That's when Claire reached out through her old roommate Sophia, sending a 20-page statement about her relationship with Isaac 5 years earlier. She described the exact same tactics, including fake public proposals, breaking her phone, isolating her from friends, threatening to kill himself if she left, and then telling everyone she was mentally unstable when she finally escaped. The 4th week, everything exploded when Isaac Isaac tried to break into the shelter at 3 in the morning with bolt cutters. Security cameras caught him with a gun in his waistband, rope in his backpack, and a suicide note in his pocket blaming Eden for ruining his life. I recognized the murder-suicide setup from all the research we'd done on similar cases, and the police arrested him before he could get through the fence. The story hit the news the next day, and Detective Johnson's phone started ringing with calls from other women who dated Isaac. 3 former girlfriends came forward with stories about escalating abuse, fake suicide attempts, and stalking that went on for months after they left. His law firm discovered he'd been using company resources to track Eden's location through her credit cards, and had even falsified some of his credentials on his employment application. By week 4, Eden was sitting in front of the grand jury with her voice steady as she described everything he'd done to her. I waited in the hallway with Jordan and Lily, knowing our evidence backed up every single thing she was saying in that room. The grand jury came back with multiple felony indictments, including aggravated assault, stalking, criminal threats, false imprisonment, and attempted murder. The bail hearing happened 2 days later, and I sat in the back row watching Isaac in his orange jumpsuit trying to look harmless, while his lawyer stood up saying his client had strong community ties and no prior record. The prosecutor pulled out a stack of papers, including the searches Isaac had done on his work computer about murder-suicide statistics and how to make deaths look accidental, plus the insurance policy he'd taken out on Eden 6 months before without telling her. Isaac's lawyer kept arguing that these were misunderstandings, but then the prosecutor showed the court Isaac's journal entries from the week before the restaurant, pages where he'd written about how if he couldn't have Eden, then nobody could, how he'd rather see her dead than happy without him. The judge read through everything while Isaac sat there gripping the defense table so hard his knuckles went white, and when she looked up she called him an extreme danger to both the victim and the community, before denying bail completely. Isaac jumped up screaming that Eden was a lying whore who'd ruined his life, that she belonged to him, that he'd make her pay for this betrayal, and the bailiffs had to drag him out while he kept shouting threats that made everyone in the courtroom go silent. A month later, Rachel took the stand as a prosecution witness, her hands shaking as she described growing up watching Isaac hurt their pets when they didn't obey him perfectly, how their parents always made excuses saying boys will be boys. She looked at Eden and started crying as she apologized, saying she knew something was wrong when Isaac would brag about controlling his girlfriends, but she didn't know how to stop him, didn't know it would get this bad. Rachel talked about finding Isaac's high school journal where he'd written about wanting to own someone completely, about how their dad would laugh and say Isaac just loved hard, about their mom trying to warn Isaac's first girlfriend before their dad shut her up. Meanwhile, Eden was slowly putting her life back together, getting a new phone number that Isaac couldn't flood with messages, opening her own bank account at a different bank where he didn't know anyone, reaching out to old friends she hadn't talked to in years because Isaac had convinced her they hated her. I started visiting her every Thursday at the coffee shop where we'd first met, both of us ordering the same drinks and sitting at the same table, not really talking about what happened, but just being there as 2 people who'd survived the same night. She showed me texts from friends Isaac had blocked on her phone without her knowing, friends who'd been worried but didn't know how to reach her, and we counted 17 people he'd cut her off from in just 2 years. The number 17 blocked friends really makes me wonder how Isaac kept track of all those lies, and which contacts he'd deleted from Eden's life without her catching on for so long. How did Eden's brain process finding out Rachel knew about Isaac's old journal? When it was my turn to testify, I brought my laptop with all the photos from that night displayed on the courtroom monitors, showing the jury how Eden's body language screamed fear, while Isaac performed his romantic fantasy. I walked them through each shot, pointing out her white knuckles, her eyes looking for exits, the way she pulled back every time he reached for her, the forced smile that never reached her eyes. The photo of Eden mouthing, "Help me," made several jurors gasp, and one woman had to wipe her eyes, and I explained how Isaac had paid me specifically to delete any photos where Eden looked unhappy, because he knew she wouldn't look happy. The defense tried to argue the photos were taken out of context, but I had timestamps showing the progression of Eden's fear throughout the dinner, 43 photos documenting escalating panic that no amount of context could explain away. Isaac couldn't stand watching his narrative fall apart, so he insisted on testifying against his lawyer's advice, taking the stand with this fake humble act that lasted about 5 minutes before the prosecutor started asking real questions. She asked why he'd put a tracker on Eden's car, and he said Eden was forgetful and needed help remembering where she parked. Then she asked about the cameras he'd hidden in Eden's apartment, and he said Eden had asked him to install them but couldn't produce any proof. The mask started slipping when the prosecutor asked why he'd threatened Eden's coworker who gave her a ride home, and Isaac snapped that Eden didn't need rides from other men, that she was trying to make him look bad by accepting help from strangers. By the time the prosecutor asked about the bruises, Isaac was calling Eden ungrateful and saying she needed discipline, that women like her didn't appreciate good men, that he'd given her everything and she'd thrown it in his face. The jury watched him transform from the victim he claimed to be into the controlling monster Eden had described, and when he started ranting about how Eden would be nothing without him, how she'd come crawling back, even his own lawyer put his head in his hands. 3 months into the trial, other people from the restaurant started coming forward, including a couple who'd been sitting 2 tables away, and the waiter who'd served them, all saying they'd felt something was wrong but didn't know what to do. Tom from the restaurant testified that when Eden came back alone that night looking for help, he'd noticed bruises on her arms he hadn't seen in the dim patio lighting, and he kept apologizing for not calling the police himself when she'd run to the bathroom. A woman who'd been celebrating her anniversary said she'd wanted to check on Eden, but her husband told her not to get involved in other people's business, and now she couldn't stop thinking about what might have happened if everyone had just kept ignoring the signs. Eden spoke at a domestic violence awareness event while the trial was ongoing, standing at a podium in the community center where 50 people had come to hear her story, her voice steady as she described how isolation happens slowly, how control looks like love at first. I sat in the 3rd row watching her transform her trauma into something that might save someone else, and when she said a stranger with a camera saw what everyone else missed, that sometimes help comes from unexpected places, she looked right at me and nodded. She talked about the small signs everyone ignores, the red flags that look pink when you're wearing rose-colored glasses, the way abusers test boundaries to see what they can get away with, and 3 women came up to her afterwards saying they recognized their own relationships in her story. The jury deliberated for only 3 hours before coming back with guilty verdicts on all counts, including stalking, assault with a deadly weapon, false imprisonment, and attempted murder, the forewoman's voice clear and firm as she read each one. Eden sat perfectly still as the verdicts were read, and only when the judge thanked the jury did she start crying. Not happy tears, but exhausted ones, the kind that come when you can finally stop holding your breath after months of suffocating. At sentencing a month later, Isaac's father finally stood up and admitted he'd failed his son by never holding him accountable, by making excuses for increasingly violent behavior, by teaching him that taking what you want was the same as being strong. He announced he was establishing a fund in his late wife's name for domestic violence survivors, saying she'd tried to get Isaac help when he was younger, but he'd dismissed her concerns as overprotective mothering, and maybe if he'd listened to her, Eden wouldn't have almost died. Isaac's father looked at Eden and said he was sorry for creating the monster who hurt her, that he'd spend the rest of his life trying to make amends for what his enabling had caused, and Eden nodded but didn't say anything back. back. When Eden gave her victim impact statement, she stood at the podium facing Isaac directly, describing the nightmares she still had, the way she checked locks 5 times before bed, how she couldn't eat at restaurants anymore without mapping exits first. She talked about the 18 months of systematic torture he'd called love, the way he'd made her doubt her own thoughts, the times she'd wanted to die just to make it stop. And Isaac sat there smirking like her pain was amusing. Then Eden's voice got stronger as she said he didn't break her, that she survived him, that she'd keep surviving long after he was forgotten, and the smirk finally left his face when he realized she meant it. The judge cleared his throat and looked straight at Isaac while adjusting his glasses. Everyone in the courtroom went quiet as he started reading from his notes about the evidence, the recordings, the photos, the witnesses who all painted the same picture of a man who used love as a weapon. Isaac's lawyer kept trying to object, but the judge shut him down every time, listing off the charges one by one, while Isaac's face got redder and redder. The judge talked about patterns of control and escalation, about how Isaac had systematically isolated Eden from everyone who cared about her, about the bruises hidden under makeup and the fear that lived in her eyes. When the judge said 15 years, the whole courtroom seemed to exhale at once. Isaac jumped up so fast his chair fell backwards, screaming that Eden was a liar, that she'd regret this, that he'd make sure she paid for ruining his life. The bailiffs grabbed his arms, but he kept yelling threats even as they dragged him toward the door, his voice getting higher and more desperate with each step. Eden sat there shaking while her lawyer put a hand on her shoulder, and I watched Isaac disappear through the doorway, still screaming her name like a curse. Outside the courthouse 20 minutes later, Eden found me by the steps where I was waiting with my camera bag. She looked different already, like someone had lifted a weight off her shoulders, and when she smiled it reached her eyes for the first time since I'd met her. She told me I could have just taken his money and walked away, but instead I saw a woman in danger and chose to act, that I gave her life back. I started to say it was nothing, but she shook her head and hugged me tight, both of us crying a little on those courthouse steps. 5 months passed before I saw Eden again at her new apartment, a place with good locks and a doorman who actually checked IDs. She'd adopted this rescue dog named Bear, who barked at strangers, but loved Eden like she hung the moon, following her from room to room with his tail wagging. We sat on her couch drinking coffee and talking about regular stuff like the weather and this new show on Netflix, not every conversation revolving around trauma anymore. Bear kept bringing us his toys, dropping them in our laps and looking hopeful until we threw them across the room for him to chase. Eden laughed when Bear tripped over his own feet trying to catch a tennis ball, and it was a real laugh, not the forced kind she used to do. She showed me the garden she'd started on her balcony, tomatoes and herbs growing in little pots, something she'd always wanted to do, but Isaac said was stupid. A few days later she texted me that Claire had reached out wanting to meet for coffee. They met at this quiet place downtown where Claire told Eden about her own year with Isaac, how similar their stories were, how she thought she was going crazy until she saw Eden's case on the news. Claire was going back to school to become a counselor for abuse survivors, turning her worst experience into something that could help others. They sat there for 3 hours comparing notes, finding healing in knowing they weren't alone, that Isaac's pattern was the problem, not them. The call about Isaac's appeal came on a Tuesday morning while Eden was at work. The prosecutor said they'd found recordings from the jail phones where Isaac was trying to hire other inmates to hurt Eden when they got out, offering money he didn't have for addresses and photos. The judge denied the appeal immediately and added 5 more years for the conspiracy charges, making sure Isaac wouldn't see daylight for 2 decades. Eden called me crying, but they were relief tears this time, finally able to plan a future without looking over her shoulder. 6 months after the trial, I started getting invited to speak at domestic violence centers about recognizing the signs I'd seen that night. Tom from the restaurant came to one of my talks, and afterward asked if I'd help train his staff on identifying concerning situations, turning that night's failure to act into future prevention. We created this whole program for restaurant workers about subtle signs to watch for, how to safely intervene, when to call for help without making things worse. Jordan started coming over to Eden's place every Friday for movie nights, their friendship slowly healing after Isaac's poison. How did Eden find the strength to look Isaac in the eye during her victim impact statement after everything he did to her? Watching someone transform from victim to survivor while their abuser sits there smirking must take incredible courage that I can't even imagine having myself. They had inside jokes again, could text without Eden panicking about how Isaac would react, could just be friends without fear. Eden laughed at Jordan's terrible impressions of movie characters, throwing popcorn at him when he got the voices wrong, and it wasn't forced or careful anymore. Her sister Lily graduated from college that spring, with Eden sitting in the front row wearing a yellow sundress she'd picked out herself. No one had told her what to wear or how to act, and she cheered louder than anyone when Lily walked across that stage. After the ceremony, they went to lunch at this little place Lily loved, taking pictures and making plans for Lily's new job, sisters again without Isaac's shadow between them. Detective Rodriguez called one afternoon to tell Eden something that made her cry all over again. 3 women had left their abusive relationships after seeing Eden's story in the news, recognizing their own situations in hers. One of them had been planning her funeral instead of her escape, until she saw Eden survive, and realized maybe she could too. Eden sat with that information for a long time, understanding that her worst nightmare had become someone else's lifeline. A year after that awful night at Shea, Eden asked if I'd go back there with her along with Jordan and Lily. We got the same patio table where everything had happened, Eden sitting in the exact chair where she'd asked for help. She ordered her own food this time, chose her own wine, laughed at her own pace without performing for anyone. The waiter who'd served them that night came over and apologized for not seeing what was happening, for not helping when she needed it. Eden told him it wasn't his fault, that Isaac was good at making everything look perfect from the outside. We stayed until closing, Eden reclaiming that space where her nightmare peaked, turning it into just another restaurant where she could eat with friends. When we left, she looked back at the patio one more time, then linked arms with Lily and Jordan while I walked beside them. The photographer who'd been hired to capture a fake proposal had instead documented a real rescue, and now we were just 4 friends walking through the city on a warm night. Eden was planning to start graduate school in the fall, studying to become a therapist like the one who'd helped save her life. She wanted to sit across from other women who thought they were crazy or weak or alone and tell them the truth about survival. Isaac would spend the next 20 years in a cell while Eden built the life he'd tried to steal from her. She'd never be the same person she was before Isaac, but she was becoming someone stronger, someone who knew her own worth. The last time I saw Eden, she was at a survivor support group, telling her story to a room full of women who needed to hear it. She stood at that podium steady and clear, wearing the red dress she'd bought for herself, the one that meant she was free. 6 months after the trial, I met Eden at Chez Laurent again, this time at her invitation. She walked through those same doors, but this time she was choosing to be there, picking the table by the window instead of the patio, ordering the salmon she actually wanted instead of waiting for someone else to decide. Her friends from the support group were there too, 3 women who'd become her chosen family, and they laughed about normal things like bad first dates and Netflix shows, while other diners enjoyed their meals without knowing this was the place where everything changed. After dessert, I pulled out an envelope with a photo I'd never shown her before, one I'd caught between Isaac's staged shots when she was looking away from him toward the street. In that moment, her jaw was set and her eyes were clear, and even surrounded by his performance, she looked like someone planning her escape. She studied it for a long time before looking up at me with tears in her eyes. Tom stopped by our table wearing his manager badge, explaining how that night had changed everything at his restaurant. They'd implemented a new system where anyone could order an angel shot at the bar, which meant they needed help, and his staff now went through training every month to recognize signs of someone in distress. He'd personally called every restaurant in the city to share what happened, turning that terrible night into something that might save someone else. Eden told us she'd started volunteering at the domestic violence shelter 3 days a week, sitting with women who were where she'd been, helping them fill out restraining orders and navigate the court system. The law school applications were already on her kitchen table because she decided that knowing the system from the inside was the only way to really help. That afternoon, Rachel's letter arrived at Eden's apartment, 4 pages of apology and accountability about how she was in therapy now to understand why she'd enabled Isaac for so long. She'd included a photo of their aunt at a fundraiser for the Domestic Violence Coalition, holding a sign with Eden's name on it, proof that their family was learning to fight the right battles. My photography business had exploded after the story went viral, but I was different about clients now, trusting my gut when something felt wrong, turning down money when the vibes were off. That $500 Isaac paid me had been donated to the shelter 10 times over, along with free headshots for any survivor who needed them for job interviews. Eden still went to therapy every Thursday where they worked through the ways Isaac had broken down her ability to trust herself. She still double-checked locks and flinched when someone touched her unexpectedly, but she was learning to recognize these as normal responses to abnormal treatment, not weaknesses. Her therapist had a photo on her desk from Eden's college graduation, back when she trusted her instincts without question, and they were working toward finding that person again. Maria called from Portland that week to tell Eden they'd turned her case into a training module for law enforcement across the state. The recordings from that night were teaching cops to recognize coercive control, showing them that abuse wasn't always bruises, and that sometimes the most dangerous violence was psychological. Eden had given permission for them to use everything, because if it helped one officer recognize what was really happening, then something good came from her pain. That night, Eden wrote in her journal while her rescue dog slept at her feet, filling pages with words she'd never been allowed to say when Isaac controlled the narrative. She wrote about surviving but not being unchanged, about some days being harder than others, about choosing to wake up every morning and face a world that had once felt too dangerous to navigate. The last thing Eden did that day was go through her phone, deleting every photo from her time with Isaac, every text, every memory he'd contaminated with his control. She replaced them with new ones from the support group, her dog learning to fetch, her rebuilt friendship with college friends who tried to warn her, and finally one selfie with me at the coffee shop where this all started. We weren't smiling because this wasn't a happy ending. It was just an ending, and we both knew the difference between surviving something and being healed from it. Eden would never be the person she was before Isaac, but she was becoming someone else, someone who knew her worth because she'd had to fight to reclaim it, and that was enough. What a journey. I've loved diving into every twist and wondering about all the choices with you. If you made it to the end, drop a comment. I love reading all your comments.